Hello, BookTube. I have survived the 4 children of the apocalypse, my 2 nieces and 2 nephews. As I've mentioned several times the past few weeks, my brother and his family are moving. They've bought a house, and the move has taken a bit longer than they had anticipated, and I've been watching the 4 children of the apocalypse rather frequently the last few weeks. And this week they've been rather more apocalyptic than usual. But everything's worked out. They've finally finished moving, and hopefully in the next few days, once they've settled in and got everything put back together, all of the furniture and stuff, me and my mom will be going over there to look at the new house. We haven't seen it yet. So anyway, it's time to get to the books. So first up, let's start with my readings for New World. New World's November, the new BookTube reading event created by the Bookish Bryants, and of which I am one of the co-hosts, although probably one of the least active ones. Anyway, so I've been reading from the big book of science fiction edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. And this week I've read from The Visitors by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky to Mondocaine by Jacques Barberi. I think I got the pronunciation right. So this week's reading, or this past weekend's reading, was a lot better than the first week's. There are a lot of stories this past weekend that I enjoyed. Like The Visitors, I really enjoyed. Pelt by Carol M. Schwiller, quite enjoyed. Standing Woman by, I'm blanking on his name. I'll go find it. Yasutaka Tsutsui, which is really good. And of course, probably my favorite book in the collection so far, Saying King by George R. Martin. So I'm going to talk about 2 of the stories, and then I will maybe talk a bit more about more stories when I do my New World's November wrap up the first day of December. So I'm going to talk about Pelt by Carol M. Schwiller and Saying Kings by George R. Martin. So Pelt is the story of a dog, the Queen of Venus, and her human who is a hunter. They live on either a frozen planet or the part of a planet that is currently in winter. I'm thinking it's a frozen planet, but could be just a planet in winter. Anyway, so the dog and her human are out hunting, and Queen of Venus is worried. There's a scent that is just bugging her, and she knows there's something out there watching her and her human, but she doesn't quite know what it is or who it is. And she wants to tell her human, but she just doesn't have the ability to tell him. And then she encounters, while she's away from her human sniffing around, what's been haunting them, what's been watching them. And it's a sentient native to this planet. And the sentient communicates with her telepathically, one assumes, urging her to break free from her, what the alien perceives as her enslavement to the human. And the call to freedom is enticing, and the Queen of Venus doesn't quite know what to do. She's confused. And then the hunter kills one of these aliens and takes his pelt. And only after the alien has been killed and skinned does he realize that he just killed a sentient. And this act just completely shatters him. And the reaction of the aliens, their confrontation with him, continues to shatter him. And the dog she doesn't know how to respond because, I mean, she's obviously loyal to her human. She's can't really conceive of being away from him, but then also that she feels native to this planet, and that uncertainty, that interior conflict, I really enjoyed, and also really enjoyed M. Schwiller's description of the planet. It's just very crystalline and really good. And of course, Sand Kings by George R. R. Martin. This is one of my favorite works of science fiction. I first read it a few years ago in an earlier anthology by the Vandermeers called The Weird, which collects weird fiction, which is part of the spectrum of science fiction and fantasy. I mean, science fiction and fantasy are an expansive genre that covers a lot of subgenres, and the weird is really, in a way, the parent genre of science fiction and fantasy as we know it. Essentially, when science fiction and fantasy first developed in the 20s and 30s, it was as the weird. And obviously, one of the most storied magazines, pulps from the period, Weird Tales, name. And then gradually, science fiction and fantasy kind of spun off as their own genres. And then the weird kind of sort of, I think, disappeared and then comes back every now and again. But the weird is, in a way, the melding of science fiction and fantasy, horror. It's just a mashup. And then, of course, in the early 2000s and a little bit into the 80s and 90s, there was a sort of a new subgenre called the New Weird, of which Jeff Vandermeer is a writer of fiction. Most of his work can be described as New Weird. But anyway, getting back to Sand Kings. So I first discovered Sand Kings and the Weird Anthology, and I was overjoyed to see it also included here. And Sand Kings is about the story of a psychopathic businessman named Simon Kress, who has a fascination with exotic animals, and quite extreme exotic animals that he has as pets. One day he goes on an extended business trip, and all of his pets die. So he goes looking for new pets to replace them. And he's not satisfied with anything he's seen. And one day he goes to a importers that he's never heard of called Woe and Shade, where Woe introduces him to little insect-like aliens called Sand Kings. They're basically sort of like ants and termites who have a sort of rudimentary sentience or intelligence that as the story progresses, we learn that as the Sand Kings develop, they become more and more sentient. But as their earliest insect stage, they basically build towers, castles, where you project images into it. They will carve that image into the castle. And then they also war, which attracts Simon's interest. He takes 4 and he raises them for a few weeks, grows bored, and starts to starve them so that they begin to fight sooner. And he pretty much proceeds to torture them for the next months, constantly forcing him to fight, introducing all sorts of other predators to sort of spice things up. It becomes increasingly toxic. And the Sand Kings, again, being rudimentarily intelligent, having a sort of sentience, recognize that. Recognize they are being tortured. That this human who, in a way, is their god, is actually more of a demon. And their sculptures of him reflect that. And then he goes nuts, and he did something else, and eventually the Sand Kings escape, and all heck breaks loose. But what I find really fascinating at the end of the story is that really the Sand Kings aren't the monsters of this piece. Simon Cress is. And the most horrifying, the most sort of exclamation point on that is that at the end, the Sand Kings have his face. It's a brilliant ending. I loved it. Yeah. So I had a very positive, just really good weekend with Big Book of Science Fiction. So over the course of the work week, I switched to nonfiction, and I read 2 books. How, I don't know, but I did. I read Building an American Empire by Paul Frymer. This looks at how land policy on the frontier led to the construction of the white settler nation that is the United States, or white settler empire that is the United States. And he talks about how, as the frontiers of the United States expanded through the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the Louisiana Purchase, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the annexation of Hawaii, that the United States government sort of takes over this incorporated land and gradually tries to parcel it out, to slowly, incrementally expand the settled borders of the country. And it's just an amazing, powerful work. I really enjoyed it. And how sort of this sort of gradual encroachment kind of informed American relations with Native American nations, with Mexico, with Hawaii, how depending on circumstances, the acquisitiveness of some American imperialists were stymied because certain of their targets were a little too populous to enact this strategy on, namely the southern half of Mexico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, the Philippines. This is a really, really fascinating book, and I quite enjoyed every moment with it, and very thought-provoking. It's incredibly good. And I also read Raised to Rule, Educating Royalty at the Court of the Spanish Habsburgs, 1601 to 1634, by Martha K. Hoffman. So this book looks at how the children of Philip III, Philip IV, Anne of Austria, Maria, and Carlos and Fernando were raised. And so that's part 1. It looks at how they were educated, how they were religiously educated, and then in the second part moves to sort of their transition to adulthood through the courtship and marriages of mainly Anna to Louis XIII and Maria to, I'm blanking on her husband. He was Holy Roman Emperor, though. We're in line to become Holy Roman Emperor. and also Philip IV, marriage to Isabel of France. And then it looked at the Infantes, Carlos and Fernando, and their role growing up. And then it also looked at Philip IV himself, and his maturation as king. And this is a really fascinating book. I quite enjoyed reading it, although it was incredibly dense and slow going. And how I managed to read it in 2 days, I have no idea. But I did, and I quite enjoyed the experience. So I highly recommend both Building an American Empire and Raised to Rule. So, what will I be reading this coming weekend and into the Thanksgiving holidays? So, I plan to continue with the big book of science fiction. I'm currently about to start Blood Music by Greg Bear, and I'm not entirely sure how far I will get. I could theoretically finish it this weekend, although there's no real rush. So I mean, my plan is to kind of do it throughout November. So I might try to like pace it, my reading in a way. We'll see. And if I do finish this weekend, I'll figure something out for the last weekend and 2 days of November. And as for nonfiction, I plan to read The Other Americans in Paris, Businessmen, Countesses, Wayward Youth, 1882-1941 by Nancy L. Green. This looks at, obviously, Americans in Paris. And also Lords of the Sea, A History of the Barbary Corsairs by Alan G. Jamieson. And I'm quite looking forward to both, and can't wait to read them. So that's what I've been reading. And I've already talked about the kids. Oh boy. Yeah. We had them over yesterday for hours, and their devices ended up dying, and they got to be unpleasant, but yeah, we still love them. Is there anything else I want to talk about? Yeah, we had I watched the verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Miscarriage of justice, that one. But then again, yeah, what did you expect? I mean, expected. Also, well, I kind of wanted to talk about the what's been going on in Texas. I don't know if you know, like it's been reported widely or not, but there's one state legislator who sent a request to, I don't know if it would select school systems or school districts or all of them in Texas, if they have any books on this 800 book list that he's sort of investigating. And from what I've heard, I mean, what I can tell, most of those books are, not all of them probably, are completely innocuous. And then Governor Abbott's, Governor of Texas, is jumping in on it, demanding to know if there are any quote-unquote pornographic books in school libraries, and demanding criminal investigation is just like, it's disgusting. And somehow the left's scarier. Blue checkmark Twitter is scarier than that. I mean, it's like, not like blue checkmark Twitter. I'm sorry. It's not like blue checkmark Twitter has any power except for eating its own. Whereas, I mean, a state legislator and the governor of Texas, I think, have a little bit more power, even if they absolutely shouldn't. But anyway, so yeah. So I did get some books in. Also, I mentioned in an earlier tag video this week the 1001 books tag that I had at that point 902 books. I now have 906. I had a book haul yesterday from the University of Chicago. They have a sale on, and I availed myself of that, and I'm quite pleased. So I can't wait to do my November book haul. I don't know if I'm going to add any more books in or not. We shall see. It depends on my mood. And also, I'm in the process of buying Christmas presents for the 4 children of the apocalypse. So anyway, and so I think that's all I've got for now. Thank you, BookTube. Have a great afternoon. Well, yeah, great evening, because I'm doing this at my usual Friday time. Weekend, and stay safe.